So a little bit of information and a little bit of what's going on. So as you just brought up, the meeting's being recorded for training and promotional purposes. The meeting will be locked shortly for security purposes, but we'll keep looking at who's in the waiting room. All questions asked in the chat function facility today will be calculated and answered during the meeting, but also we will take some questions outside the meeting and answer them for you. So initially, it's how to complete a suitable and sufficient Legionella Risk Assessment by Carl Hughes from M&S Water Services Limited. Then myself and John Jones will do the Q&A session. Then we'll have a bit of a branch news and update, IOSH news and update, and the final remarks and close we'll do. So any questions, please put them in the chat function so we can collect them and ask the speaker. And then finally, today's discussion is, on how to complete a suitable and sufficient Legionella Risk Assessment. Our speaker is Carl Hughes, Compliance Manager from M&S Water Services. If I now stop sharing, Carl, and if you now share your screen, Carl.
Okay, everyone should be able to see that. Hopefully. Good there.
Just get a bit close. We can't hear you that well, Carl.
Is that any better?
That's much better. Take it away.
Okay. Well, as Richard just said there, my name's Carl Hughes. I work for a company called M&S Water Services Limited. We're based in North Wales, just across the border there. I'm going to try and give you an understanding of what's involved with regards to the Legionella Risk Assessment. For the purpose of this presentation, I'll be dealing with hot and cold services only. There are other risk systems that I won't be touching on, for example, cooling towers, spa baths, etc., and things like that. It's too much information to kind of be done in such a short kind of period of time. So what we've got going for us is, first off, a little bit about M&S Water Services. As I say, that's what I've worked for them for over 20 years now. They've been going since 1988 when they were founded by Chris Much and John Stiles, hence the M&S. The slide there details of the services that we provide, from boiler and cooling water services and chemicals to compliance with the ACOP L8 HSG 274 by means of ongoing works, and obviously Legionella risk assessments, which is what this presentation is about. As I say, the company kind of goes down the lines of being a kind of friendly face on things. So we like to people to know we've been on site, what we've done, etc., and things like that. And we're there for any questions. We're not a fire and forget company. We're always there to answer any questions that anybody's got in future. So there we go. So we start off here now. So a little bit about Legionella bacteria. As you can see, it's acquired its name from an American Legion convention in the Bellevue Stratford Hotel in Philadelphia in July 1976, when an outbreak of pneumonia occurred within the people within attendance. Of 182 reported cases, mostly men, 29 died. 38 cases were from passers-by were reported, of which 5 died, including a taxi driver that was literally just driving past. Water aerosols, which were emitted from the convention center's cooling towers, were heavily laden with the organism. Due to poor maintenance and inspections of the towers, water aerosols were escaping freely from the towers and were drawn into the fans controlling the air handling system for the building's air conditioning, as cool air is denser than warm air. When it enters the room, it was carrying the aerosols in it, and hence it made its way into the room. On January 18th, 1977, a causative agent was identified and subsequently named Legionella, with the species that caused the outbreak named Legionella pneumophila. So Legionellosis occurs when a fine contaminated water droplets are inhaled. There are numerous different sources where this can occur, ranging from previously mentioned cooling towers to showers, air conditioning units, and spa baths. Spa baths is quite a big thing at the moment. They're getting more and more keen on things like that, because obviously it's got, as you can see here, you know, it needs specific growth requirements, which is temperature range of the water from 20 to 45 degrees. You know, spa baths are right in that range. Nutrients, rust, you know, iron, algae scales, sludge, and organic particulates. Although it's still present in a range outside of 20 to 45 degrees, at below 20 degrees it's dormant, and above 60 degrees it will not survive. People are more at risk of their exposure are people over the age of 45. Smokers, heavy drinkers, people suffering from chronic respiratory or kidney disease, diabetes, lung or heart disease, anyone with an impaired immune system. Symptoms are very similar to pneumonia, which is a high fever, chills, headaches, severe muscular aches, cough, breathlessness, diarrhea, vomiting, and confusion, delirium. One example, I'll just go offside there, is I'm an identical twin. By chance, the two of us had a chest infection at the same time. My brother had completely different antibiotics that I had, because I had to declare to my doctor that I deal with Legionella control. So there are different kind of ways of treating it now compared to pneumonia. There's a lot of, when completing a risk assessment, we need to take into account, as the previous slides have said before, what's required to create the risk for Legionellosis. So the presence of Legionella bacteria, it's everywhere. It's natural water supplies and things like that. You just got to give it the conditions to grow, which we've mentioned before, with 20 degrees, between 20 and 45 degrees water temperatures, nutrients, etc. The presence of individuals who are exposed, as detailed in the previous slide there. So, you know, you're people, you know, over the age of 45, respiratory illnesses, smoking, etc. The source of the system of the supply water, whether this is from town mains to private water supplies, the borehole, etc. Processed water, possible contamination as it reaches there. So where does the water go before it gets to, say, a cold water storage tank or a cooling tower or anything like that? Things like that. And then another one there to take into account is how often is the system offline for any period of time. So what they say in a little used outlet is an outlet that's not being used within a weekly basis. So any outlet there falls outside of that is obviously being off for a period of time to, you know, create stagnation, things like that. So, and obviously, like with everything else with with the Health and Safety at Work Act, if it's any findings that need to be recorded if there's over 5 or more employees. So one of the first things that you look for when you go to a site or when you're carrying out there is the risk assessment needs to be completed by a competent person. It's up to the duty holder, so again, who are employer, person who's in control of the premises, or self-employed if it's, you know, if you're causing risk to others. The duty holder's then got to appoint a competent nominated responsible person and deputies. So they usually kind of go for more than one person, because if the nominated responsible person's off for any period of time, so the holidays or sickness and stuff, you've got someone else there to carry on their responsibilities while they're away. So the duty holder has got to offer the position of the responsible person and deputies in writing, and they've got to accept it in writing as well. So this takes away any grey areas with regards to, you know, I didn't know that I was supposed to do that and things like that. If you're a responsible person who's been asked to be a responsible person for Legionella control, you need to make sure that you understand your roles and responsibilities, what you're supposed to be doing, why you're supposed to be doing them, to make sure you're suitably trained to carry out the works and things like that as well. So usually a good time for me to get to know the customer is and get an idea of what control measures they've got in place and what understanding they've got for Legionella, is to have a kind of good conversation with them, check if they've got any schemes involved, whether they've got like ongoing works for, you know, flushing of little used outlets, temperature checks, etc. Go through what needs to be done and whether the tests are being carried out and how effective the tests are. I've been to sites in the past whereby there's been temperatures that, throughout the whole year, the cold water storage temperature has been exactly 12 degrees. So you've got to get an understanding that, something's not quite right with that system, or whether the person who's actually carrying out the test isn't carrying out the test properly. If there's nothing in place, then one of the things you've got to put into place for the risk assessment is what they need to be doing on an ongoing side of things, which I'll come into details in the recommendations section as well. There's obviously ongoing works that will need to be done, but there'll be remedial works that will need to make sure that the system is compliant as well. Also check to see if there's a management structure in place, which is what we just said on the previous slide there, whether there's a duty holder, nominate responsible people, etc. involved. And what their kind of training is and what the level of training is as well. You've got to understand that they've got to ensure that there's a clear line of communication. For example, that the duty holder, the deputy reports to the nominate responsible person, they then report to the duty holder then reports back, or details back to the nominate responsible person. This ensures that kind of nobody's getting missed out or anything like that on the system there, and you're making sure that you know what you're doing when they should be doing it. So just a few things of kind of what you need when you're doing a risk assessment. Obviously, you need to make sure that your thermometer is calibrated. The ones that we have there, we get them calibrated on an annual basis. This is just to make sure that the accuracy of the results are there. Again, like I said previous, there was a thermometer I'd seen on one site that was showing 12 degrees throughout the whole year. So, you'd see on a cold water that, in the winter months, it'll obviously be a lot colder than will in the summer months. So it's kind of a red flag there straight away to say, something's not quite right with the equipment. So to make sure it's calibrated and kept up to date. Torch, obviously, looking into cold water storage tanks up in roof spaces and things like that, just to see what the internal conditions are, follow any pipe works and things like that. Suitable sample bottles. So a couple of times I've been on site, you see things that you think, this is, I need to kind of action this straight away. So you'll take a sample there to be tested for, to be sent off to a lab for Legionella testing. Digital camera to kind of to show evidence of what you're seeing when you're on site and things like that as well. Recording devices, I go retro still, I use a clipboard and walk around and things like that, but people have used voice recorders, etc., just to make sure you kind of cover everything. Suitable PPE, just make sure you're wearing your hard hat, high vis, etc., and things like that, and whatever the site are kind of telling you that you should be wearing. So the procedure of things to go is, first off, it's the responsibility of the site to ensure that any water diagrams and schematics are up to date and they're kind of in use. We, as part of our risk assessment, we actually include any schematics into the assessment, but obviously it's up to the site to kind of create those documents themselves and to make sure that they're available for you for inspection purposes. And then we're always taught just to go with the flow, find your incoming mains, where it comes in, make your way around the site, note any cold water storage tanks, any hot water storage, whether it's calorifiers and things like that, what their conditions are, whether the temperatures are compliant, so whether the cold water is less than 20 degrees and your hot water is greater than 50 degrees at the outlets. If you see a cold water storage tank, the first thing is, same with everything else, is can it be removed? Can you bypass the system to mains water? This will significantly reduce the risk of Legionella proliferation within the cold water system. So again, it's a good thing to remove the problem before you start to control it. There's numerous different ways of heating the hot water, whether through a calorifier, combi boil, or various point of use units. Little instantaneous ones that you see above the sinks and things like that as well. There's different requirements for those, whether it's stored water, except for temperature, which I'll go into detail afterwards. Note any dead legs on the system. These will need to be removed to prevent any back contamination within the system. So the idea there is you've got a section of pipework that's not getting any movement of water through it. What then can happen is within there, you've got the stagnation, any Legionella bacteria can then leach back into the system water. So you need to kind of note those on the system diagrams and make a recommendation to get those removed. As I say, at the bottom there's obviously a lot more detail that you got to go into. So there's different backflow preventers, ranging from check valves, which is your fluid category 1s, and then all the way up to your kind of fluid category 5, which is your air gaps, which you'll see a lot of cold water storage tanks in lab water and things like that will have that there to prevent anything from in the labs kind of making its way back into the mains water, etc., and things like that. You know, for example, toilet cisterns as well. So, as I mentioned previously, when you're kind of doing a checklist on a cold water storage tank, you need to know first off whether the inlet and outlet are opposed to each other. The reason why you do this is to ensure that a good cross flow of water through the system. Is the tank made of approved materials? Whether, like this one on the right hand side, whether it's GRP, glass reinforced plastic, plastic one that you'd see up in the roof space of your house, or whether it's the old style galvanized steel tanks there and things like that. Tank needs to be insulated. So the idea of that is that, you know, in the roof spaces like that one on the left hand side there, that you're not going to get a lot of heat gain from the ambient temperature in the water in the roof space. You take a temperature from the inlet and the outlet. So the idea there is you're kind of making sure you're getting a good cross flow of water through the tank itself. There shouldn't be any more than a 2-degree difference between the incoming main of the bore valve and the cold water storage tank temperature remote from that. If it does, then it could indicate anything for a lack of cross flow, so the inlet and outlet isn't opposed, or whether the tank is too large a capacity for what's needed. You'd make a note of what the internal conditions are. So you can see on the left hand side you've got quite a lot of corrosion debris in there. There's a bit of scale around the inlet, any debris and things like that, or any microbiological activity that's in there. You can see on the one on the left hand side there's no lid on it, so you need to make sure that the lid is kind of a close fitting lid on there to stop anything from getting in there. Luckily in this one here, nothing has actually made its way in and died in there, which we've seen plenty of in the past. You've got to make sure that the cold water storage tank is sized appropriately. So you need to make sure that water within the system is turned over within 24 hours. If it's longer, then you need to make considerations whether you need to reduce the capacity within the tank or change it to a smaller tank to get that flow of water through. That one on the left hand side at the bottom there, for example, when I did more digging, is a 2,000 litre cold water storage tank that fed 2 toilet flushes in a building. That was it. So as I say, the first thing you would say there is straight away on the risk assessment is just get rid of it, bypass it to mains. You've got obviously systems that are on mains water, so we don't need to be in there. Last thing there, you would check to see how they're connected. So whether they're connected in parallel or series. So if they're in parallel, you need to make sure that the inlets to both of them are balanced properly. So you're not getting one tank taking the brunt of the water and the other one kind of becoming stagnated. And if they're in series, one of the things to look out for is usually when you haven't got the break of water going into the tank, which is aerating the water from the incoming main, you might get stagnation within the center tanks where there's no movement of water, just literally just as the water rises and lowers and things like that. So next one about the hot water side of things. So the same with the cold water storage tanks, you need to make a note of how the water's there we go. So as I say, so with regards to the same as the cold water storage tanks, you need to make sure that how the hot water's heating. So on the left hand side, you've got a chlorifier, the green vessel that's there. One of the things there is the cold water comes in at the bottom of it, comes out the top of it. So one of the things you need to make sure is the water coming out of that the cylinder is set to a minimum of 60 degrees. As we said previously, Legionella bacteria won't grow in water greater than 60 degrees. If it's got a flow and return system on, which you'll see in a lot of modern buildings or larger buildings where the water goes round and it's got a circulation pump that will bring the water back to the cylinder, the water coming back to the cylinder needs to be a minimum of 50 degrees. These are different if it's in healthcare premises and things like that, which is the HTM side of things, which we won't go into on this one here. For lower volume storage, for example, your combi boiler in the middle or the one on the right hand side, these need to be stored at a minimum of 50 degrees to maintain it. So each of these systems, the temperatures you're using, you're needing to maintain 50 degrees minimum at the outlet that the water's coming from on that one there. The clarifier on the left-hand side is a higher risk because you've got the cold water coming at the bottom, and you've got an area within the middle where you've got the ambient temperature for Legionella proliferation. The gas-fired one at the bottom, you've got obviously the burners underneath, so it's heating the water from the base where the cold water's coming in, so it's doing its damage there. You've got the combi boiler where there's no stored water, instantaneous one where there's no stored water, and the low volume ones there, which you kind of maintain at 50 degrees. So what we've got here is the primary rule for Legionella control is the temperature. So what you're after on this side of things here is, as we mentioned before, to make sure you get the cold water to the outlet. So the tap that you turn on has got to be below 20 degrees within 2 minutes. This doesn't mean that you have to keep running it for 2 minutes and then logging it. It needs to be kind of brought down within there. And if it starts plateauing out, then obviously that's the temperature you take for the cold water side of things. You make sure that the hot water is storing or providing water at the right temperature that we've mentioned previously, whether it's a clarifier or instantaneous ones. The little instantaneous ones that of the previous slide, the little above ones there's no kind of real requirement to say that that's got to be above 50 degrees. It's usually for hand wash and things like that, so they act like a point of use as they are. So you can kind of draw temperature of water out there less than 50 degrees and it not be a problem. You've got to, as part of the assessment, you take a temperature and you flush the sentinel outlets and you record the temperatures of those. So maintaining your 20 degrees less than for your cold water, and then again your hot water has got to be above 50 degrees within 1 minute of turning on the outlet. A lot of them now you see in a lot of places as well, and it's one thing that we come across a lot there is the mixer valves. So you take a temperature from the surface pipework of the incoming hot water to the TMV, which is designed there to blend the water to around about 40 degrees. So what you're looking at is your hot water providing to the TMV of greater than 50 degrees and your cold water being less than 20 degrees. You usually be able to get the cold water from the cold water tap. From the hot, you would take it from the actual pipework feeding it. Obviously, if you're going to go into scald risk, you need to kind of look into kind of whether the TMV is set right or not. One of the things as well is that one of the recommendations, which you'll see afterwards, is that these need to be serviced. So based on the information you'll get from the cold water storage tank, from how the hot water is, from whether there's dead legs, etc. in the system, you would then create a risk evaluation. So, whether you do it on low, medium or high, or whether you do it from 5 to 25, risk and likelihood and outcome, etc. That's entirely up to yourselves. We go down a low, medium or high because it's just easier to kind of for the customer to look at it and just see, whether it's green, amber or red. So these are just some of the examples of the hot and cold of the cold water storage tank things that you're after. So tank reference location, how the tank's connected, what is supplying, the details of the dimensions, volume, construction, whether it complies with the regs that we've just mentioned before, whether it's got a close fitting lid, etc. What the installation's like, what it's like inside. Tank temperature and supply temperature, whether you've seen, like that tank on the previous one there, where you've taken a Legionella or bacterial analysis to be sent off because you know it's quite a high risk, etc. And then you've got the clarifiers in the middle section there, again detailing the make and model, what it does, whether it's compliant, whether it's got a boiler flow primary coil going through it, making sure that's working. You take a drain sample from the drain water to see whether that's clear or not, and things like that as well. See whether it's got a secondary pump. Usually you'll see the secondary pumps like on the flow and return systems, and the installation details. The hot water heaters are the lesser kind of ones there, so there's a bit more detail, less detail on there that you have to take than the clarifiers, but still you've got to make sure that they're doing what they should be doing and why they're doing what they're doing. So we'll go to the next one. So some examples of recommendations that you would put into the control scheme for a building would be the weekly flushing of the little used outlets. This is done, like I say, they say on a weekly basis that every outlet within the building will need to be kind of used. If it isn't, it'll need to be flushed, but you need to, as with all of these, you will need to record everything that's been done. Because if HSE come in or anything like that, the first thing they'll ask for is a logbook after the risk assessment, and they'll want to see what you're doing with regards to the ongoing control of for Legionella. Monthly temperature checks on the sentinel outlets. Now, the sentinel outlets are the nearest and furthest. So whether that's the nearest to the incoming main or the furthest away from the incoming main, and the same with the cold water storage tank, same with the hot water cylinder, the nearest and furthest, etc. Shower heads, because obviously these are a risk as they're creating an aerosol. You need to make sure that they're dismantled, clean and descaled on a quarterly basis. Cold water storage tanks, you take a temperature remote from the inlet and remotely, on an annual basis. So what they usually say now is in the summer months, so where that tank temperature could be at its worst, that's where you would take when you do your inspection and your temperature checks there. Hot water, so there's no requirement that says that you have to take Legionella samples. The only time you would take Legionella samples is if any of the control measures we detailed above show that the system's at risk. For example, if the cold water is repeatedly above 20 degrees, or if the hot water is repeatedly below 50 degrees at the outlet, then you would take a Legionella sample to see what's going on in the system. You make sure that every outlet within the building, for example, like cleaners, kitchens, all the wash hand basins and things like that, you would need to make sure that they've been tested for temperature at least once a year. Clarifiers, if they've got a hatch on the side of them, you would need to open them and inspect them internally to make sure that there's no, to see what debris is going on in there, to see what the conditions are like inside. If you can't get inside them, what they recommend is you take a sample from the drain water for any debris or any kind of anything that you can see that's in there that could be causing any problems, and kind of action accordingly. And what we've mentioned before, the thermostatic mixer valves that blend the water, we've got to inside them. So on the hot side feed and the cold side feed, there'll be little strainers in there. So you've got to take them. So you do you take them apart and check the strainers and clean them all down. You'd also do a fail-safe check, which is basically you would turn the cold water off to the mixer valve, and at that point, the hot water at the tap should start going off when it gets to kind of its highest temperature and things like that on that one. So these are more kind of examples of recommendations for the remedial works that need to be done. So for example, a new fitting lid, like you would say on that previous slide, new insulation would need to be fitted, where make the inlet and outlet opposed so you get that good cross flow of water through the tank. Whether the tank will need to be cleaned and disinfected as well. The management side of things, you need to make sure that the duty holder is named, and the nominated responsible persons and deputies are identified, and all of them are aware of their roles and responsibilities for Legionella control. Clarifiers, you need to make sure that temperature is above 60 degrees. If it's a larger cylinder, you'd need to make sure the shunt pump is installed. And what that does there is it's designed so, for example, when the cylinder's not being used, say during the night or something, that the hot water will then bypass from the outlet, drop down through a circulation pump into the inlet, and what that's doing there is it's destratifying the water within the cylinder. So what's happening is you're giving the cylinder 60-degree water temperature throughout. One of the things now as well is you'll see vent pipes over hot cold water storage tank from the clarifiers. Now what they're asking is that these be sent to a separate ton dish. So the idea then is if the clarifier starts venting hot water, the last place you want a hot water to be venting into is into a cold water storage tank. One place I went to, I went into the roof space, and the tank was like turned into a sphere type of thing, a ball, because what happened is they changed the hot water system to mains pressure, and it was acting like a radiator. So it was basically the cold water storage tank in the roof space was literally just running hot scalding water through it, and that was a cold water storage tank. And then just make sure you fit any temperature gauges. This is good for when you're doing your checks on the temperature, just to make sure that the temperature inside the cylinder is doing what it should be doing. Dead legs, what we mentioned before, to make sure you kind of take them away to prevent any kind of back contamination within the system as well. So this one here is when to review the risk assessment. So you would review and record if any of the following have happened. So if there's been a case of Legionnaire's disease within the system, if there's any changes to the water and its uses, for example, you bypass your mains water onto borehole water or to private water supply and things like that. Whether you change the use of the building, so whether it was a kind of an old production building that you've turned into a warehousing and things like that, so you're not going to be turning over as large volumes of water that you would have been doing in the past. Any availability of any new information about risks and control measures. So for example, in 2001, that's when the ACOP L8 came out. In 2013, 14, depending on whether it was part 1, part 2 or part 3 of HSG 274 came out. So as I say, from then you would then kind of start recommending that that new assessments be carried out to comply to HSG 274 as well. Or if you show that there's evidence that the control measures in place are no longer effective. For example, if you're saying flush little used outlets on a weekly basis, and when you're still going to do cold water storage or cold or hot water temperatures, that they're failing. And one of the things it says in the new in HSG 274 is, whereas previously it was every 2 years, so unless any significant changes have been made to the system, for example, the ones above, we as a company still prefer to keep a 2-year review on that, because obviously it keeps it fresh in the person's mind, and it's constantly evolving and it's not being forgotten about. So just a quick conclusion that we've got on there. So what we would do is the risk assessment should include what the system is being, when the system should be reviewed, for example, every 2 years, or if any significant changes have been made to the system. An executive summary detailing the system, the building, the management structure, who's at risk, etc. Suitable checklists detailing any hot and cold water systems, assets and sentinel outlets. The assessment of the risk prior to and post control measures. So the risk, if you go to a site that's got nothing in place, and then once you put the control measures in place, what the risk would drop to. The schematics, diagrams, make sure they're up to date, whether you need to make sure whether that's something that you're going to do or whether that's something the customer's going to do. That needs to be kind of in writing in the first place. If you're going to be doing it, just make sure they're in there. You've got to understand that they're not engineering drawings, they are just drawings with regards to kind of where the water goes to and how it gets there. Photographic evidence of areas of concern, for example, dead leg located in roof space next to cold water storage tank. Details of the management for Legionella control, you nominate responsible people, your deputies and your duty holder. And any recommendations detailing what works is required, whether it's ongoing works or whether it's remedial works. If it's remedial works, how quick you need to get that work done. For example, removing of dead legs, that cold water storage tank and things like that, you'd have to put them down as immediate risks. Some of the other ones are will take a little bit longer to get rid of and things like that. And that is me done, hopefully within the time I was given. I'll pass you back to Richard once he unmutes himself.
Okay. That's great, Carl. Could you give me about 5 minutes of questions and then get going? Is that okay?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so we have some questions in the chat function.
Okay.
So, okay, should air conditioning or ventilation systems be included in the risk assessment?
We don't include them into ours because it's not something to do with the water side of things that we do. If you were to do it as part of a Legionella risk assessment, then and it's something that you are competent to do, then you would include it into it. When you're actually doing a quote or you're doing some work for a risk assessment, you need to make sure that what you're putting into that risk assessment. As I say, we as a company don't tend to do the air conditioning units, but if it's air handling units that have got a cold water supply to it, we will take it up to the cold water supply to that unit.
Okay. Okay, next one. Next question is, most premises have showers for employees. Does a cleaning procedure of shower heads counter the growth of Legionella? And what can an employer do?
So with previous there is if, and we see them in a lot of places, you know, people cycling to work and things like that. But if that person's off for a period of time, nobody's using the shower. So you would make sure the shower is flushed through on a weekly basis. So with any flushing of a system water, you're trying to minimize the spray. So what I would do on a shower is I'd take the shower head off, just have the hose that's dropping down to the bottom. So you'd flush that for, they say 5 times the supply pipe work volume. So for example, if it just comes off a little stub in the roof space, then you would flush that for a couple of minutes and go from there. So you do that on a weekly basis. So to make sure the shower is used or flushed, and then you would clean and disinfect the shower head on a quarterly basis minimum. So if you come to there, for example, we've seen it in a lot of engineering buildings, when the engineers have finished, that the shower heads are in poor conditions, then you might say, well, on a monthly basis, start, you know, cleaning and disinfecting those as well.
Okay, next question. Is there a requirement to repeat responsible person training? Is there a refresher period by law?
We kind of keep it that to keep it fresh in the mind, we usually say that every 5 years that you would kind of review the training on that side of things. It just needs to make sure that you're competent and trained to do the work that, you know, for Legionella control on that side of things.
Okay. What do you feel justifies a competent risk assessor? Many water-based systems are very simple systems. Can companies do their own assessments in-house?
Yeah. I mean, for, like I said, for what we do, the Legionella Risk Assessment training course that we do is 3 days. That covers us anything from hot and cold water systems to cooling towers and things like that. But if it's just a basic system, for example, a mains water that comes into an office building that's just got a kitchen with a combi boiler, a set of toilets, and that's it. Obviously, you'll know then that the risk is minimum on the water side of things. One of the things you have to take into account is the users of that building. So whether they fall into the higher risk categories of the, you know, an older person, respiratory illnesses and things like that. But yeah, anybody, as long as they've kind of got enough competence around what they're doing with regards to, you know, temperature control and things like that, and that, you know, they're aware of the risks for Legionella, they can do the risk assessments themselves.
Okay, there's no is there any requirement to do Legionella risk assessment on vehicle windscreen washer squirters?
I know there was a case of Legionnaire's disease from one of those, like compost and things like that as well. I've never done a risk assessment on windscreen washers, so
okay,
I don't know.
So no. Okay, if a consultant does the assessment and then another consultant is appointed, is the risk assessment a new one or a review?
If the system hasn't changed and the management hasn't changed within the building, you don't need to change the risk assessment. It's purely if the person doing the risk is, like, for example, we go to a site and do a risk assessment, and then, you know, for example, one of you guys comes in and takes over the risk assessment side of things. If the risk assessment is still current, valid, and then the management system is still the same, then you don't have to change the risk assessment if you just change the personnel who's done the risk assessment now.
Okay, just 2 when finished. How can you tell if cold water is a turnover within 24 hours?
So you can do a load test. So what you would do is you would mark the tank at a high level, turn the incoming main off to the cold water storage tank, and then do a volume check and see how much is done. Say after, obviously you'd have to kind of see how much is going through. So maybe after every 15 minutes or something like that. Another thing you could do is you could put a water meter on the incoming main to the cold water storage tank, and then just literally just mark it before and afterwards. The idea, like I said, behind that one is just to ensure you've got a good flow of water through the cold water storage tank.
Okay, what maintenance would an instantaneous heater need? Does it need internal inspections?
No, the instantaneous ones, there's no water stored in them. So you just need to make sure they're operating within the manufacturer's recommendations. So if the manufacturer says it should be operating between, say, 37 and 50 degrees or whatever, you just need to make sure that it's doing what it should be doing as per manufacturer's recommendations.
And the final question is, TMVs, is there a legal requirement to service them?
Yes. Yeah, as part of HSG 274 now, you have to do a fail-safe check. So what you would do there is, like I said, is you would turn the cold, you'd have the tap running, you told the turn the cold water supply off. And then what you would see then is as the temperature of the hot water starts rising, there's a little wax element inside the TMV that will melt, and then it should shut the system off. TMV, there's different versions. There's TMV 1, 2, and 3. TMV 3 should switch it off instantaneously. So as soon as you've done the cold fail safe, as long as the hot water's hot, the tap should go straight off. And then, as I say, once you've done that, isolate the actual TMV, remove the mixer valve, and inside there's these little top hats, little strainers. Take them apart and clean and disinfect them, and then put them back together again and make sure everything's working as it should be, and no leaks anywhere.
Okay. Well, Cole, much appreciated. Thanks very much. That was really informative. Thanks for answering the questions.
No
we'll let you go.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'll speak to you probably next week.
Yeah. Okay.
Good luck with the run.
Yeah.
And,
thanks very much.
And hope everything else goes okay as well.
All right. Cheers, all right. Richard. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Bye now.
See
Bye.
you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Okay. Now, I've got some slides just to carry on, if that's okay. Just a bit of update what's going on with IOSH. Many apologies. We're just going to get there in a minute. Hold on. Okay, can everybody see that? So, IOSH branch news and updates. So our next meeting's on the 21st.
Richard, sorry to bother. We can't see the screen.
Okay,
mate.
okay. I will close everything down and share. Okay. Okay, I don't know what's happened, but I won't share. So if I can just talk it through. Our next meeting, let me see if I can do that again. Our next meeting is on the 21st of October 21 at 18:30. Menopause at work, why important and urgent, and urgent. That's done by Sharon Vibert, from Director of Henpicked in Menopause in the Workplace Limited. Again, something different for people. And the next meeting after that is on machinery safety on the 18th of November at 6:30. That's from Mark Staples from Pilts Limited on machinery safety. IOSH update for you. What's going on? Changing membership grades still waiting Privy Council approval. Please vote for your new council members. See links from IOSH. I think you've all had emails on that subject. And also the new president, Louise Hoskins, will take over in November from Jimmy Quinn. Okay, I'm going to try and pull out what I can here. I don't know what's gone on. Okay. Okay, that's me. I'm back at last. Sorry about that. If I can just share my screen again. Okay, I'll just leave it as. Okay, so So many apologies for that. We see that the next meeting is in October. Have we got any questions that anybody wants to ask, or we'll really use it as an open forum if you want to? We've got about 10 minutes left. Does anybody want to ask any questions or anything further? Or any questions about our program going forward on machinery safety in the menopause? And in December, we've got a meeting on occupational health from Gwinnett County Council. So we are trying to look at what else is available, what you can provide, and what further information you need. Does anybody have anything, any questions or anything you want to ask the committee? Okay. All right. So I hope you enjoyed that. That was I thought was quite informative from Carl Hughes. Lots of information. Lots of information that a lot of people were probably aware of, especially on things like TMVs and the checks that are done on tanks, etc., etc. It is usually quite a Legionella risk assessment is one thing that some companies miss, and is really, really important. I mean, at the present moment, I know that in Cardiff Met University, they've had some improvement notices for not doing certain tests during the lockdown period, which people, which the HC are now investigating. And so the HC presently are looking at universities on their plan. Universities and colleges are high on their plan at the present moment, because they see Legionella again is a risk that is not going away. We've all got water systems in factories, universities, and hotels, etc. And the problem is still there. It needs to be managed, as we all know, and you have to have the control measures in place. And as Carl said, the most important thing is having a Legionella risk assessment, because that gives you the basis of what you need to do. It gives you a basis of what the conditions are of your water system, and also from that you get the recommendations. So I would say to people, look, if you haven't got a company who's Legionella Control registered that you're using, then you should look at the Legionella Control Association, because they've got all their companies are audited by the LCA. They are very strict on what is specified on quotations, what is specified with the competency of the people doing the work, what grades they are, and it is really very, it's quite strict. But a lot of companies out there are not LCA approved, and are doing Legionella risk assessments, but the controls that you have from the LCA, those companies don't have. They are companies that are audited every year by the LCA. So we've got there's a tried and tested system on ensuring that Legionella companies meet certain standards, which are major industrial standards, which mean you've got competent people doing the risk assessments, you've got competent people doing the temperature checks, etc., and also taking the analysis. Because again, you've got to have, when you take analysis for either Legionella or for potable water, you have to use a UCAS accredited laboratory to be able to do that. And so you get the correct results using the right equipment. And again, as Cole said, that you have to use calibrated equipment. So things like temperature probes have got to be calibrated. Things like any drop test equipment you've got has got to be calibrated. Legionella is a very big subject. And Carl really gave you a really brief overview, but there's more to it. If you've got cooling towers, there's more controls there, because you also have to get them site. You have to register them with a local authority, and also you've got to maintain them. And again, a cooling tower which is out of control, not being treated, not got the right water treatment system in place, or where there's a problem with temperatures, etc., is a potential major risk with the local community and also with your own workers. So it is really very important to look at what you do from a Legionella viewpoint and implement. Look at what the slides and the video we will send out, we'll put on our microsite, but you can look through Cole's slides and see how he does the Legionella Risk Assessment. But what I would advise on more complex systems where there's showers or there's any sort of aerosols being made from the process, then you need to look at a competent company, Legionella control registered, who are able to do a suitable and sufficient risk assessment, but also provide the recommendations and the control measures to prevent Legionella going forward, which is so important. So it's a really complex process, but I think Carl said quite succinctly what the issues are with doing a Legionella risk assessment, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Has anybody got anything to add or to want to ask the committee any questions? Again, on CPD or IPD, I have no issues with that whatsoever. We're here to really get members through their IPD, and really helping them as much as possible. So if anybody's got any questions on IPD, CPD, please raise them now. We've got a team of people on our committee that can answer the questions. Myself, John, Richard Bates, and we're just, ask us a question, we'll try and answer it for you. So I'm leaving that open to the floor to ask any questions they like, but we're here to take your questions, which is very quiet. You're probably sick of me talking now, aren't you, really? I don't want to talk about Legionella any further. I'd rather talk about IPD, CPD. But also, as you well know, we've got a new committee on the North Wales. We've had some additional members on the North Wales branch executive. We're trying to build a good program for this year and into next year as well. As I said before, we've got in January, we've got a sustainability meeting, which is going to be done through Formula E. We also have one of our branch executive members from Betsy Cadwallader will talk about health and safety within the health industry. And then we're looking at potentially at either a visit in March, or we will bring on a CPD seminar where we can then look at what people are doing, look at what we can help you with. And our aim is really to say, look, we'll get you through your CPD, IPD, but also the mentoring systems there as well. You can use that. It's all there for you. Okay. It's 1924. I'm gonna, if there's no questions, etc., I'm gonna close the meeting. Sorry about the technical issues. I hope you enjoyed the talk from Carl, and we look forward to seeing you in October for the next talk on the menopause. So, okay, many thanks, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Richard.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Pleasure.